Good morning, teachers. This is something I'm playing around with doing every week. We with COVID, we learned that we could use our cameras and our computers in a way that is more beneficial to the church. And so, one of the things I've been thinking about now that we're back to gathering every Sunday and we're back to having Sunday school is what is some of the ways that we can continue to use some of this technology that would still be beneficial for the church. And so one of those things that I thought about that I've always wanted to do, but have never just actually had the time to do it because of the way Wednesday nights go and the rest of the week, is I always wanted to. I remember at one church that I was talking to a pastor about every Wednesday night, he would actually take the next Sunday school lesson and hold like a 10 to 15 minute meeting with all the teachers and basically just kind of go through some of the important aspects of the lesson. But then he also used that opportunity to teach new teachers how to teach. And so this is one of the things I've been thinking about doing, and since I can do it quite easily, since I prepare a Sunday school lesson from the same book each Sunday also. So I'm doing the same thing that you are with preparing a lesson. But I also thought if I could go ahead and have this established as a habit, as we bring more teachers in, and I can add them to this email list, they also could be learning to teach from me each week as they work through the book, and they can prepare each week for class just like they're going to be teaching. And the Sundays they do get to teach, be an opportunity just for that practice of being up talking in front of people. So one of the things about how I prepare out of the Bible Studies for Life Sunday school books each week is really about 5 steps, and I'm going to just really quickly, I don't intend these to be more than about 5 to 10 minutes each week, but one of the things, and each time I'm going to talk about some aspects of the Sunday school lesson I'm going to bring out, and then also just about how ways I prepare for teaching. Excuse me, my breakfast is still coming up on me, but so this week's lesson is maintaining our focus on God. And it's talking about one of those items that we as Baptists don't talk about very much, fasting. And of course, it goes to Daniel to talk about that. And so one of the first steps I take, and this is the first step I really encourage you to do also, is before I open this teacher's guide, and you can see I've got notes where I X out stuff that I'm not going to use, but before I ever open this teacher's guide, I start with my own Bible. I'll come to the text and look and see what the focus is, what's the theme, but then I take the text that it gives us and I go to my Bible and I read through it a few times just in one translation, just whatever translation of the Bible that you're using most frequently, and I'll read through it in my Bible. And the reason I do that is because if I read through it in the Leader's Guide, it's very tempting to go ahead and start reading the commentary while I'm reading the text. I follow the same rule of preparing sermons. The commentaries are great. We're thankful for Bible teachers in this world who are writing this material and all the books that I have for preparing sermons. But we want to hear from God before we hear from another man or a woman. We want to hear what God has to say. And so I think one of the primary ways we can do that is focusing our attention, first of all, just on the text. And so one of the kind of first lessons I'll give you in this short video is begin with the text. Maybe take out a piece of paper or use your book or whatever and just kind of make some notes as you're reading through the text. And one of the things, this was actually a good lesson to start this on, because one of the things I want to point out is, like in today's lesson, we're supposed to be reading Daniel 9, verses 1 through 7, and then verses 17 through 19. And that's where the lesson is going to be drawn from, is those two passages. One of the things I would recommend you to do is when we have passages like this, where it's going to skip this is skipping verses 8 through 16, but then there are verses after verse 19, and there are verses before verse 9. And so it's really easy to teach a passage out of its context. Its biblical context of what's happening. I would encourage you, as a general rule, to always read a chapter before, the chapter the text is in, and a chapter afterwards. This might be a little bit more difficult when the lesson's drawing from 3 or 4 different texts from 3 or 4 different places in the Bible. I would say on those lessons, and we'll talk about those when we have one, just be careful. Make sure you're still reading around the text and not just the text itself. But so in this example, I read Daniel 8, I read all of Daniel 9, I read Daniel 10. And just to give me a context, now I only read the 8 and 9 one time, but I read, 8 and 10 one time, but I read chapter 9 a few times, and specifically verses 1 through 19, I read several times before I ever went to the commentary, before I ever went to the Leader's Guide. So let me say something about the Leader's Guide real quick before I say something about the lesson. In the Leader's Guide, I encourage you to use this and mark it up, highlight it, X out things you're not going to want to do. But this is kind of what I would call my preparation notebook. And I write notes all over it. And so after I read the text, I'll read the setting and the life connection part there. But then I don't worry about the stuff that's on the side. So, on the sides here, it gives us stuff about how you might want to go about the order of your class. Those are helpful, and I'll talk about those in just a second. But I don't focus on those right then. What I focus on is just the commentary. And so I will read through the passage as it's brought forth in the Sunday school lesson. And then I will read through the commentary, and anything that I think is important that I'm going to want to draw out in my lesson, maybe not everything, but anything I think is important, I'm going to underline it. I'm going to highlight it, because I'm going to use this book to prepare my lesson. I am not going, and this is where you might differ from me, and that's fine. You got to figure out what works for you best. But I don't teach from my teacher's guide. I use this as a preparation. I don't teach from it. And so I'll go through and I'll mark up the things that I am interested in. And listen, just because it's in the commentary doesn't mean it's necessarily important to be brought out in a class. A good example of that is in this lesson, and on page 129, the top page of 130, there's a pretty lengthy discussion about who Darius is. Is this Cyrus the Great? Is this Ahasuerus? Who is Xerxes? I mean, all different kinds of questions about who is Darius. And there's questions about when the first year of Darius was, when this happened. Is it good to know that information? Absolutely. God wrote it in the Bible. We want to study it. We want to know it. In a 35 to 45 minute Sunday school class, when we've got a lot of other bigger issues to deal with, I don't know that I would spend time on this. I marked it out in my text of not important for class. Now, it's good to know it, and it's good to study it and increase our knowledge, but for the most of the people in our class, it's not whoever Darius is, if he's Cyrus the Great or someone else, it's not going to change how they live their lives when they walk out of your Sunday school class. But having a greater appreciation for fasting and having a greater appreciation for how deep our prayer life needs to be so that we might focus on God, that will have an impact on their lives. And so we want to keep the main point of the text the main point. It's okay. I mean, even if you want to talk about this for just a minute or so, it's fine. But it's not the main point of the passage. And so we want to keep the main point of the passage, the main point of our lesson. And so as you go through, I just mark things, there's things that there's things that our commentary sometimes goes in great detail about that you can summarize in one sentence. Because you got to remember, sometimes some of this information is not included in the pupil's guide or the personal study guide. And so I encourage you, go through all the commentary, making notes, reading about it, reading what's going on. And so here's a great page where you can see where I've made, so I can get this close enough and focused, I've made notes all over this page. And that's just how I study. I study best with a pen in my hand. That's the reason why I don't use a highlighter. I study with a pen so I can make notes and write. And so I will go through all the commentary doing that. Okay? Now, when I get to the end of that, and I get to the end of the commentary, that's probably taken me with reading the passage maybe an hour and a half. And so I get to the end. Well, then, before I actually start preparing my lesson, I guarantee I understand things happen, and sometimes you don't get to devote as much time to preparing your Sunday school lessons as you'd like. And I understand that. Listen, it happens to me too. There's some Sundays that I get there on Sunday morning and I haven't prepared at all. And I've got 30 minutes before I got to teach Sunday school. It happens, but if you're gonna have to be less prepared, get this much done. Then you just take this teacher's guide up there and you pray that the Lord uses it and gives you clarity, and you use your teacher's guide. Now, if you have the time, I encourage you to do all that I just said, and then I would tell you all of our teachers should receive the Herschel Hobbs commentary. I encourage you. This is good, even though it's misunderstood. Herschel Hobbs doesn't write them anymore. Herschel Hobbs is dead. He passed away several years ago. Other men write them now. It's just still called the Herschel Hobbs commentary. But I usually pick up the Herschel Hobbs commentary, and I read through it. And I make notes in it as I'm preparing the Sunday school lesson. And so let me encourage you, do the same thing with that. Pull up the commentary. If you have books in your home, this is where you could use them. I'll be honest, I don't. I have books on Daniel. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, and I can count at least 2, maybe 3 commentaries on Daniel. I will not pull them down to study for this unless there's something that's puzzling to me and I don't know how to interpret it. Then I might seek help from another book. Majority of the time for Sunday school lessons, I don't. I do that a lot for sermons. I do it every Sunday for sermons, and that takes up a lot of time. And so I have to devote more time to the sermon preparation than I do to this. Now, if you have more time and you want to devote to reading books or getting commentaries on Daniel, I encourage you to do so. But it's not necessary. With having the commentary in the Sunday school book, having the Herschel Hobbs commentary, and maybe a study Bible, you can do really well with just those 3 things. Okay, so quickly, once I get done with that, I take the pupil's guide, the personal study guide, and this is when I go through all the notes on the side about how to organize my class. And I think through every aspect of where we go from here, all the questions that can be asked. I write them out. I actually take a piece of paper. I learned this from W.A. Criswell. A piece of paper folded in half, and I write on the front, I write on the 2 pages in the middle, and I write on the back. And I will write, as you see, I've already started preparing mine for Sunday. And so I'll write stuff about the introduction. I don't write out the questions. I just write question 1, page 128 of Personal Study Guide. And then I write out something I would answer for that question just in case nobody else answers. And so I just go through and write out all the information I want for class. And so I will break up for the instant, and once I get that, I'll get to each Bible passage. I will write down the Bible passage, and then I will write notes down, verse by verse, through the commentaries that I've read that I want to bring out. And then I will have all this in a personal study guide that I take with me, and this is what I teach from. I take this piece of paper and the personal study guide. I do not take my teacher's guide. There's too much information, and it clouds your eyes. I encourage you just to write out what you want to say, because if you take the teacher's guide, it's really easy to get distracted with everything that's going on the page. And so, honestly, I could go into class with just this and not even need this. I just really take this up there in case somebody has a question. And so, all right, so that's really how I prepare. I'll be giving other hints and stuff like that each time we go through the lesson. I got a couple minutes left before I hit the 15-minute mark. So I do want to point out a couple things about this lesson. Is that fasting is something that, like I said, we don't talk about it as much anymore. It's not common. But I want to encourage you to encourage your Sunday school classes to really think about fasting. Matthew chapter 6, verses 16 through 18, right after the Lord's Prayer, there's 3 paragraphs. One says, when you give, talking about giving money to the church or giving money to the temple and to helping people. When you give alms, he says when you give, and then he says when you pray, and that's when we get the example of the Lord's Prayer. And then also he says when you fast. Fasting was to be expected of God's people. And there are different ways you can fast, and this is one of the things I want you to focus on with your class. Some people cannot fast completely from food due to health reasons. But there are other things you can fast from, because the whole point of fasting is to deprive ourselves. So the word to humble themselves in the Old Testament was referring to fasting. It was depriving themselves of something. It was usually referring to food. But you think about how many things we could fast from. I have fasted from television. I have fasted from Facebook. I have fasted from coffee. I have fasted from Coca-Colas. I have fasted from a lot of things, and the whole point is that whenever you reach a point where you would normally do that, or you'd watch TV, or you get on Facebook, or do something like that, you're reminded, I need God. So in the same way, when you're fasting from food, after about 2 days, you start getting hunger pains where your stomach starts to twist. And every time you feel one of those pains, it's a reminder of how deep our need for focusing on God is. So as you go through this lesson, let that be the main point. That our main point is that we're to seek to do everything we can to focus on God, and that includes fasting. So I want you to encourage in the Live It Out section that you encourage your Sunday school class that over the course of the next week that they would find something to fast from. Maybe it's to fast from food next weekend before Sunday school. Maybe it's to fast from television this week. I think all of us could use a healthy dose of turning the television off. Whatever it is, I want you to encourage your class to focus on fasting from something in order to devote some more attention and more time to God and His Word. I love you all. Each week's will not be this long. I had a few minutes of introduction explaining why I'm doing it. I hope these are beneficial to you. And if you know of people in your class who you think would make good teachers, if you get me their email, I'd be glad to send them the videos each week. I'm going to be talking to people, trying to recruit more teachers. But I love you all. I'm thankful for what you do. I pray that God blesses you this weekend and blesses your Sunday school class. I pray He blesses you as you study. Let me pray for you, and then we'll be done. Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for these teachers. God, I pray that you would bless them this weekend. I pray you bless their families. I pray, Lord, that you bless them with the time they need to properly prepare for their class this Sunday. God, I pray that you give them every ounce of knowledge and wisdom that they need for this Sunday to proclaim your word. God, may we all walk away from Sunday school and church this Sunday as a people drawn closer to you through your word by the power of your Spirit. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, blessings to you all.